Download our complimentary guidebooks, checklists, and other useful financial resources at savantwealth.com/guides.
Greetings. Welcome to today's Savant's live webinar. Thank you for joining us. My name is Danielle Dahn. We are discussing, are you on track to retire? I'm a financial advisor out of our Naperville, Illinois office. I get the opportunity to discuss retirement readiness nearly on a daily basis. So excited to dive into this today. And joining me is my fellow financial advisor, Miriam Falaki. Welcome, Miriam.
Thanks, Danielle. Also looking forward to covering this topic. I am an advisor out of the Atlanta, Georgia office.
Okay, so preparing for retirement, there's a lot involved here. We're just sharing that this is educational, not specific to your information. So follow up with an advisor for further questions. But essentially, preparing for retirement, there's a lot involved. So we've got a breakout agenda of 4 different key areas. We're going to start with saving strategies before your retirement. Then, how are you going to replace that income in retirement? And one of the bigger expenses that can be in retirement is healthcare. And then finally, in the preparation for retirement, you also need to consider all the implications associated with Social Security, Medicare, taxes, and etc. So we're going to jump in and get started with saving strategies before retirement. Go ahead, Miriam.
All right. So as we think about being on track for retirement, we like to work with individuals to ensure they don't fall into what we call lifestyle creep. This wheel here is basically showing, someone's career path. You start working, you live paycheck to paycheck, you work more, you get a raise, you have more money, you spend more money. And as you progress in your career, obviously your lifestyle starts to change. But when people do get caught up in this wheel, they typically don't increase their savings number. And people say, oh, when I retire, I won't spend near as much as I do when I'm working. While there is some truth to that, you are still going to want to replace at least 75 to 80% of your income. And people want to maintain a certain standard of living that they created throughout their career. It's easy to say you can cut out certain expenses and some will drop off, if you had kids and they're out of college and you don't have a mortgage, but you still want to keep that lifestyle that you've created. And that's why we always recommend saving a percentage versus a dollar amount. When you get a raise, you will likely spend a little more, but might forget to increase your savings amount if it's a flat dollar figure. But when it's a percentage, the savings number will go up with your raise. And you can always think about your savings as, you're just paying yourself for the future, really. Next, I'm going to go over, these are our savings buckets, if you will. Savant is the first place I heard the word buckets. And when we're identifying various types of investment accounts, we encourage individuals and families to try and fund each of these buckets prior to retirement because it provides for more favorable outcomes when trying to optimize other financial planning strategies. Not only can these buckets be used to meet certain future spending needs, but they also play an important role in reducing income tax, qualifying for less expensive health care, and taking advantage of unique financial planning strategies that may not have made sense while you were working. So the specific buckets shown here are the pre-tax accounts, after-tax accounts, and tax-free accounts. So the tax-free buckets are the traditional IRAs, 401ks, and SEP IRAs. So those grow tax deferred, but distributions are taxed at a higher, at your ordinary income tax rate when you take it out. And then the after-tax investment accounts are often called, brokerage accounts or taxable accounts. This income is taxed annually. Growth on the distributions are taxed at, a favorable capital gains rate. And then the last buckets are the tax-free buckets, like your Roth 401ks, Roth IRAs, and health savings account, which, by the way, is one of my favorite accounts because of the triple tax benefit that you get. When you make the contributions, those come out of your paycheck pre-tax. It grows tax deferred, and when you take the money out for qualified medical expenses, you don't have to pay any taxes on it. A little later in the presentation, Danielle is going to go over the financial planning strategies that you can take advantage of when you have these different buckets. So I just listed out all the different types of buckets to invest in, and while most people know that they're out there, it can be hard to prioritize where to direct your savings. For example, we'll have people come to us with a sizable amount saved up in their brokerage account, a smaller balance in their 401k or HSA, and they haven't been maxing that out, but they've been able to really save after tax, which is great. But most importantly, we want people to have, when we think about the hierarchy of savings, we want people to have a basic emergency savings account, right? Financial professionals say to have 3 to 6 months in living needs. And the reason this is suggested is if you lose your job, it can take up to 3 to 6 months to replace that income or find a new one. But typically I like to tell people to have at least that or a number that you feel comfortable with, that you can sleep at night. And then once you have that, that balance that you want in your savings account, the next goal is to contribute to your 401k or HSA to take advantage of the full match if your company offers one. If you're not contributing enough to receive the full match, you're essentially leaving free money on the table. And if you're self-employed or work for a company that doesn't offer these benefits, there are other types of retirement plans that could be suitable for you based on your situation. It's definitely worth exploring. So, once you kind of get the max, then the ultimate goal would be to max out the retirement plans. Contributing the max to your 401k can automate your savings and enforce discipline in your planning. It's often easier to save consistently through payroll deductions rather than relying solely on manual contributions to other accounts. And then after that, your goal is to contribute to IRAs, Roth or traditional. There are ways to contribute to these accounts if you are above the IRS income limits. And then, after you've kind of maxed out all those, we suggest, filling up that brokerage or after-tax account. The brokerage account can be accessed at any time, with no penalties, some tax consequences depending on the growth. But that's why we save that at the end of the sequence. People are easily tempted to take money out of these after-tax accounts since they can, which is one of the reasons why we're enforcing maxing out, those retirement buckets first. But by following this sequence, you can really prioritize the key financial objectives and then optimize the use of the tax advantage accounts in retirement. So we get this question a lot, should I be doing Roth or traditional? This is it's a tricky question. Of course, it depends on your situation. Ultimately, it depends on if you want to pay the tax now or later. But what we want to point out here is what many people don't realize is that if their employer offers a 401k, they likely have a Roth 401k option. The Roth 401k is somewhat newer in the sense that they were allowed into company retirement plans starting in 2006, and they have been becoming more and more popular ever since. Still, not all companies that have a 401k offer Roth, but if yours does, it would be worth exploring to see if that makes sense. And then, the factors to consider when choosing between the two, I'll start with the Roth 401k. So Roth 401k are made with after-tax dollars, meaning you don't get an immediate tax deduction, but any withdrawals later in retirement are tax-free. Also, it can provide diversification in retirement since with the withdrawals are tax-free, having a mix of Roth and traditional retirement savings can offer flexibility in managing tax liabilities in retirement. And then the contributions, not the earnings to a Roth can be withdrawn penalty-free at any time, providing flexibility in emergencies. There are no income limits for contributing to a Roth 401k versus the Roth IRA, which makes it accessible to individuals at higher income levels. So then when we look at contributing to a traditional 401k, those are made with pre-tax dollars. It's reducing your taxable income for the year of the contribution. This can lower your current tax bill. Investments in the 401k grow tax deferred until withdrawal, and then you pay taxes upon withdrawal. But if you're in a higher tax bracket now than you expect to be in retirement, contributing to the traditional 401k can provide immediate tax savings. So which option is best for you? Like I said, it's kind of like, do I want to pay the tax now or later? Some individuals choose to just split the contributions between Roth and traditional just to hedge against future tax uncertainty and be able to start filling up those two different buckets. Another item to keep in mind is that the employer match is always pre-tax money. So even if you're doing just Roth and you want to have some pre-tax, the match that is contributed by the company is always going to be pre-tax, regardless of whether you choose to do Roth or traditional. Ultimately, the best decision just depends on your unique circumstances.
Okay, thank you, Miriam. And I would like to just point out on this last slide here, when it says RMD begins now in 2024, it begins at age 73, but we'll discuss that in just a moment too. So here we have replacing income in retirement. So you've spent all this time, because we're talking about today, how do I prepare for retirement? Are you on track? You've spent this time accumulating money. So how do you transition that wealth into a paycheck? How do you replace your paycheck? This is what we're going to talk about in this section. So bear with me. This slide has a lot of things going on. I'm going to point to a few things on here. But if you at all are interested in finance and personal finance specifically, I've been in the business nearly 2 decades now. And this is a slide that I will geek out on. I think this is a great slide. This is just a generic illustration for a retiree. You're working with a financial planner advisor. This is the blueprint for what your retirement income looks like and the planning you need to do now in order to make this as flexible as possible for you to recreate this paycheck. That's really important. So I'd encourage you to have this exercise done for yourself so that it's customized to you. But here, let's start with what this slide is saying. It's saying, where will my cash flow come from? So here's just a very simple, basic example where this orange line is referring to after-tax income. We want to focus on after-tax spending. So where are you spending your money in terms of your day-to-day living expenses, all of that money that's going out? The sources of your income are going to vary based on your age and what type of account we're withdrawing from. So taxes, income taxes specifically, are kind of separate from this. Focus on now the money going out the door and what you're spending. So in this example, let's pretend someone's working and they just retired. This shows a graph of 200,000. You could be making well over $200,000 in income, and all of a sudden you fall off, right? You're retired. So what does that look like? Maybe you do some part-time work for a couple of years. That could be what this yellow is representing here, right? And we've got to meet this orange line. Maybe this example, there's a retirement home purchased, a second home in a few years, right? So we've got a larger expense. Then we've got a couple of expenses that are growing with inflation and they pop up a little. In this example, it's not uncommon to plan for a car replacement every 5 years in the beginning of retirement, right? Then we have this orange line going down a little bit. More than likely, that is simply the point in time. If you have a low interest rate mortgage and you're continuing to pay that principal and interest, this could very well be it falling off right there at that point in time. And then we continue through and we've got a cap here where you'll see a drop off. Well, this is just a sad fact in life that life ends at some point, right? So if we're looking at this for a couple based on life expectancy and ages and gender, we've got this first spouse passing away here and the expenses for the surviving spouse. So if we look at all of this, we've got some part-time income, and then look at how much a big part of this graph is this dark blue. So that's representing your Social Security payments. So you may control the timing of when that begins, but once you begin it, this money's coming to you no matter what, right? And then when we think about that income on top of it, look at this green. The green is referring to required minimum distributions. So where were we talking about? This is the forced distributions from your retirement account. It's going to be based on a couple of factors, your age, and the account balance at the end of the prior year is going to determine how much has to come out by law. So this is the minimum amount. So we've got here some assumptions of income that has to come in later years. Well, look how you're in your late 80s, early 90s in this scenario, and you have way more income than you need. But the earlier years of retirement, it's just the opposite. Well, that's usually how people don't want to live their lifestyle, right? They want to enjoy retirement in the early years in terms of travel and other goals and have these go-go years in the first few decades of retirement. So if we look at that, there's a lot of things to consider. We have a really high income from working, more than likely, maybe some phased off in terms of employment income, and then you fall down to near zero, right? And this wouldn't necessarily be the funnest cocktail party because you'd be discussing finance, but let's pretend this is such a missed opportunity. You're this retiree, you're so proud of yourself, you go to the cocktail party and you say, I went from the highest tax bracket to now I'm in the zero. I'm in the 10 or the 12. It's the greatest thing ever, right? And if you came to me as a client or prospective client years later and we missed that opportunity, I'd be like, oh my gosh, oh, we missed out huge because you're 0, 10, and 12. That's such an opportunity now. So think about that. If I draw here, and I'll show you in a moment, as this a big circle here, this is your opportunity where you can control your income. Because look at this huge tax liability coming down in the back end, whether you like it or not. And this can get even more expensive. Let's pretend that one person passes away. Well, all this forced income that's coming out is now coming to the survivor, and the tax filing status is changed from joint to single. That becomes considerably more expensive. So how do we take advantage of being in these lower rates? And you can do that through things such as Roth conversions. Did you know that your brokerage account that you're building up over time, that you have gains, that there's actually an opportunity to have 0% gains realized? People don't even realize that often that there's a 0% bracket. There's so many things that you can do, as opposed to if you just ignored this and let this play out, it's such a missed opportunity. So you need this customized to yourself. You need the different buckets that Miriam was talking about so you can afford yourself a lot of flexibility in here. So here's an example of just drawing in. We're taking all that future income and we're being thoughtful about it, how we're spending it and how we're using it in the earlier years of retirement so that we can control our taxes, okay? Because if you've always been in the high income earning years, the whole purpose is to defer that income, as Miriam said, through those tax deferred plans. Well, ideally you take it out when you're in a lower year tax bracket, a year with a lower tax bracket, as opposed to a higher tax bracket. So you need to plan accordingly. Okay, so this here, that slide was the synopsis of most everything I want to talk to you about retirement income. But where will the income come from? So we have a target here just as a visual, and the side that says, for me, it's the left-hand side, probably for you as well. But it says start with non-market dependent sources. This is just saying your fixed pieces, like I just illustrated. Your Social Security is coming to you no matter what. Your pension is coming to you if you're lucky enough to have a pension. Maybe you have some rental income. Maybe you have a fixed annuity. These sorts of things that are not flexible in the sense that they're not variable with market performance. Then we have in the lower left here, the required minimum distributions. So that's money that's forced out in later years that's coming to you no matter what. So aside from those pieces that are having to come to you, how do you supplement it? So on the right, we've got the word supplementary. Like Miriam was saying, we want bank savings. You always need an emergency fund. That cash that makes you sleep well at night so that you're not going to mess up by making a drastic change in the rest of your portfolio because you feel uncomfortable. What makes you feel safe and secure so that you can keep your plan intact? And then above and beyond that, everything else is fair game for using for retirement spending. Then the next place we go, just like the order that Miriam had listed before, we have your non-qualified investments. Those are your brokerage accounts that are not retirement accounts. And then after that, we've got the retirement accounts, which can be IRAs, 401ks, the alphabet soup, 457Bs, 401As, 403Bs. It just keeps going, right? Depending on the type of employer that you have. You may be self-employed with an individual 401k, lots of options there. And then last, we have Roth IRAs, which are the tax-free bucket. So as you think about it, what we're trying to press here is that you have a lot of different sources that will be variable or fixed in the way of risk, and we've got varying tax treatment. So how do we control the risk, and how do we be thoughtful about having a income tax efficient income stream throughout retirement? And if you're doing this right, it can vary in every single year based on your specific situation. This slide here, in the interest of time, is just a visual of the things I discussed, sources of income, Social Security, rental income, part-time work, pensions. And then the next section we want to talk through is one of the larger expenses in retirement for many, planning for healthcare.
Thanks, Danielle. I did want to mention real quick that we are seeing some questions coming through the chat. We will do our best to address as many as we can at the end. And if we can't, we'll try to get back to you. But yeah, keep them coming. We like it to be as interactive as possible. So the rising medical care costs, as Danielle mentioned, this is one of the higher expenses that you'll face in retirement. The main reason for the rising cost of healthcare is associated to advances in medical technology, people are living longer, rising prescription drug prices, and of course, inflation. Now, healthcare can have the biggest impact on your retirement planning due to the potential magnitude and unpredictability that it can cause. So in this example here, in this study that we pulled, the average retired couple at age 65 can expect to spend around $315,000 on healthcare expenses alone. Now, if you think about that over the course of a 30-year period, that's just a little over $10,000 per year, which is in line with, or maybe even a less than what most people are paying for routine healthcare costs annually. And then, when you start to think about how you're going to pay for healthcare in retirement, you need to consider, of course, what age you plan to retire. Health insurance is a big reason many people will delay retirement and wait until age 65 when they qualify for Medicare, especially if you've relied on employer coverage your entire life. It's not uncommon at all for individuals in their 50s or 60s to pay over $1,000 per month for healthcare costs. It's by far, I know we keep mentioning this, one of the biggest expenses in retirement. So if you're planning to retire before age 65, that needs to be factored into your financial plan. This table illustrates just some estimates on what healthcare could cost for a healthy individual based on their age. Now, these numbers just indicate the monthly premiums. You can plan to add an extra $5,000 to $12,000 per year per person for additional healthcare costs. And then if you have an HSA account, this would be a great resource to help fund your healthcare expenses. Hopefully you were able to save into it and had invested and had some growth. And the good thing about these accounts is that the distributions are tax-free as long as it's for qualified medical expenses. Now, we can't use the HSA to pay for the premiums, but there is a long list of qualified medical expenses that it can be used for, like doctor visits, prescription medicine, dental care, vision, medical equipment, supplies, and so on. So that's when it'll really benefit you to help supplement those additional costs after the premium of the healthcare. And then, of course, with increased life expectancy means that retirees need to budget for extended period of life, potentially several decades, and individuals who require long-term care, they're generally not sick in the traditional sense, but they are unable to perform 2 of these 6 activities of daily living we have listed here. Long-term care insurance is really just designed to provide coverage for expenses associated with long-term care services, which are often not covered by traditional health insurance or Medicare. The policies vary in terms of coverage and benefits. You can choose the amount of daily benefit, coverage, elimination period, etc. So the cost of the premiums depends on the individual's age, health status, coverage amount, and policy features. And premiums are likely more affordable the younger you get it, the more healthy you are. And just, if this is something you want to pursue, just make sure you review the policy details, coverage limits, exclusions, etc., so that you can avoid any potential surprises. Long-term care insurance does play a critical role in planning by helping to protect your savings from high costs of long-term care services. So we just want to make sure that if this is something on your mind, we want to incorporate that into a financial plan. I will say that another option for long-term care, of course, is to fund it with your own resources, since long-term care policies tend to be more costly and may not cover everything that the person might expect. So when we create a financial plan, we will bake the cost of long-term care into it to see how it will affect the retirement goals. We always want to make sure that you can make it through challenging circumstances without running out of money in your lifetime. So if someone, if we're going through the plan and we realize someone might not have enough liquid resources to cover this, maybe this event that may happen to them, we also take into consideration the equity in their home that they may have. It's kind of worst case scenario, if you will. So, we encourage you to think if you have a medical history in your family of people needing long-term care, just incorporate this cost in your financial plan as you're preparing to see if you're on track for retirement, just to make sure that you do have the resources to cover this for yourself. So next, Danielle is going to go over Social Security, Medicare, and taxes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Miriam. And let me say, Social Security, Medicare, and taxes each could be their own webinar and has been, and I participate in these. So what we're going to do is the broad strokes, because we're talking about preparing for retirement here, getting ready for it. So the broad strokes of how these impact your total plan and how you should start incorporating and thinking about them now. So first of all, Social Security. Social Security may seem like a straightforward endeavor, and it can be. In some scenarios, it is. But again, having done this a couple decades, even thinking about this, I still need to write down what, especially if it's a couple, what's the birth date, what's the benefit, at what ages, what's the other sources of retirement income, how are spousal benefits impacted by each person applying, how are survivor benefits, because there really is a process of determining what is the best claiming strategy for yourself. So please be very thoughtful and seek out some professional advice when you're making this decision. So the first thing we have listed here is pros and cons of delaying till 70. So many of you are likely familiar that if you delay past your full retirement age, you can only delay up until age 70. Then your Social Security benefits are coming. But each year that you delay, you get an 8% raise. So that sounds good, right? I'm getting larger checks. The trade-off is I'll get fewer checks, right? Because I waited. Alternatively, if I take my Social Security earlier, I'll get smaller checks, but more of them. So essentially, those two will have basically a path where they would cross, right? So where's my break even? Generally, this is in the early 80s. And what you want to consider here is the fact that that's your break even point, but you need to consider, how does filing impact a spousal benefit? If one person files early for themselves, waiting for the spousal benefit, their spousal benefit will be impacted. You need to be careful about these things. Survivor benefits. Again, if it's a married couple and all things equal, we've got one person passing, there is one benefit that is paid to the survivor, and it's going to be the larger of the two. So maybe you want to consider if there's a huge disparity in the benefits of a husband and a wife or same-sex couple. Same thing. All it matters is marital status. When we look at that, you may want to have the higher income earners benefit delayed as long as possible, because the survivor then has a greater amount of Social Security, which is meant to be longevity insurance. Another thing that's listed here is earnings tests. So if you do choose to take your Social Security benefits before your full retirement age, do know that there's a limit to how much you can earn before your Social Security benefits are reduced and what they're paid to you for those years. So you want to make sure you're familiar with those rules. You also may be eligible for ex-spouse benefits. There's a lot of things to consider. Oh, we also have listed here health and life expectancy. So I like to think of Social Security, even if you plan to delay it, because often that's a very good decision given their other resources. Let's pretend that something changes in their health, or maybe the market pulls back considerably, and instead of taking all of your withdrawals from your portfolio, you would rather start having some of this fixed income coming in. There's reasons to do it. And essentially the way I think about it is that Social Security to me is like dry powder. It's ready to go. It's ready to be ignited and used. So you can have a plan, but you can also pivot and start sooner if your circumstances change. All right, so here we just have, again, Social Security in itself is an entire topic. So here's some things to consider, but this is only scratching the surface. So please connect with an advisor. We've got a lot of questions coming in, but I doubt that we can get to all of them today. It won't be possible to address them all live. So please, there will be an opportunity at some point to click in the chat on a link to schedule a time to discuss your particular circumstances for 15 minutes at a time that's convenient for you. And we'll visit that again, but just seeing all the questions talking through. So the earnings test, we talk about a reduction in benefits if you're taking before full retirement age and still working. You don't want to be surprised by that, right? You don't want the income to be different than what you planned for. Government pension offset, windfall elimination. If you are a government employee, you're a teacher, you can have pensions that reduce your Social Security benefit, and there's a calculation associated with that. You can find a lot of that on the Social Security website, and it can be complex. So it's also something that you want to discuss with your advisor and how it impacts you and your family benefits. Then we've got the benefits are taxable. Sometimes people are surprised to find, hey, this is my money that I put away through payroll for years. Now I'm going to be taxed on it when it comes back to me. Yes, you are. So it's taxed between 0 and 85%. So when we talk about creating that income through the income streams, the income you create in other sources is going to determine how much your Social Security is taxable. So you need to be careful and mindful of this. And a good advisor can help you walk through this and navigate it. We've got listed here that Social Security allows you to withhold at set rates 7, 10, 12, and 22%, sorry. And then we've got Medicare. Medicare, you can either file with Social Security or separately. And finally, the Medicare premiums are typically withheld directly from your Social Security benefits. Now here we're talking about Medicare, a huge topic in itself. Just know that this is something that comes into play at your 65th birthday. So this is your birthday month. You've got the 3 months before you can enroll and the 3 months following your birthday month. So that's your enrollment period. If you're still working, you're going to have to coordinate your benefits about which one becomes your primary insurance. So there's enrollment periods that may apply that are different if you're still working. And you're going to have supplemental insurance likely in addition to original Medicare. And the very last piece is watch out for IRMA. This is something that's very big for us. So we happen to have a picture of a woman on the screen. I don't think she is named Irma or is a scary person. But once you're a retiree, no one likes IRMA. I have yet to find anybody who likes IRMA. IRMA stands for Income Related Monthly Adjustment Amount. So where you can get tripped up is like, let's pretend that you're a retiree today in 2024. What Medicare is looking at is your 2022 tax return. It goes back 2 years, and it's looking at your modified adjusted gross income. So you need to be careful because your income is also going to determine the bracket of how much you're paying in premium for Medicare, which can increase substantially with your income. So you don't want to have surprises. There's processes to address the fact that maybe you retired between that period of time. There's an appeal process. There's change in circumstances for life events. You can discuss all this with your financial advisor. But if we're doing Roth conversions, accelerating any sort of income, you better bet we're also considering how's this going to impact your Medicare premiums, because we consider that almost like an additional tax. It's a cost of creating income. So you better be thoughtful and considerate, right? So all the more reason as you're preparing for retirement, set yourself up to have these different buckets, be as tax efficient as possible so that you can create a retirement for yourself that's flexible. And in the interest of time, just really quickly, this is nothing more than saying, here's the taxable buckets, the traditional IRA and the Roth IRA. So across the screen, we're saying tax-free, tax-deferred, taxable. The types of investments you hold in each of these buckets is really important. For example, bonds are now paying greater interest where we haven't had for, the decade prior. So I'd rather have that interest hit in my tax-deferred account as opposed to my taxable account where it's going to be on my tax return each year. And then also, if I'm going to have my growth assets, I want to be in my Roth account because that's growing tax-free. And if I'm going to have some things that are more defensive, I want to be in the traditional because that's deferring the taxes down the road. And that's going to be the most expensive to me in terms of coming out at ordinary income rates. You do not have to know all this. You just have to know that you want variety in the types of buckets and you want to be smart about what holding goes in each bucket. So again, a good plan will address this for you. And then here we have a few other things to cover. So just quickly, we talked about Roth conversions previously. It's simply saying voluntarily taking the money from your pre-tax accounts, paying the tax, and moving it into a tax-free bucket. So your future tax is 0. It's tax-free, assuming that you have it in the Roth account for 5 years. And there's rules associated with it, but just essentially think of it, it becomes a tax-free bucket. It's not subject to required minimum distribution rules. It's a great asset to leave for legacy reasons. It's a good asset to have flexible and available to you if you need a withdrawal and otherwise your income for the year would be really high. It just gives you all kinds of flexibility. And one of the last pieces we want to share here is not only all of these income, tax, healthcare expenses, retirement expenses, these are all very important, but just as important, and it's way more important than a single slide, but you need to think about this. Helping navigate, at least 4 or 5 people retire every single year for a couple decades now. You see a lot of different things, right? And you need to have a plan for retirement. Some transition very successfully, some have regrets, some it may change their relationship with their spouse for the positive or the negative. You just need to have a thoughtful and careful approach because we can have our identity very much wrapped up in our work, right? So when we think about that, you want to have a plan. You don't want to just be exhausted, leave the workforce, and then take 2 weeks to rest and sleep and catch up on life, and then maybe spend the next month or so cleaning out the house, getting all the paperwork that you put, all these things you put off for years, and you're getting everything ready to go. And then you're going to look up and be like, what's next, right? So careful consideration about what you want, what it looks like, how do you want to spend your time? And another thing to consider is when Miriam was talking about the lifestyle creep and your expenses now, the thing to think about in retirement is that every day becomes a Saturday. So how do you want to spend your money? How do you want to spend your time? What do you value? What's important to you? So having some really careful consideration about what you're retiring to is a very healthy thing and can bring you a lot of joy and satisfaction in a time of change. Now, when we think about all these different things we're talking about today, we're really just touching the surface. We're providing you with education at a high level. But if you want to get more granular and into the details of your circumstances, we have a link in the chat here that says, take our financial health assessment. So Sivan is thinking about 10 key areas when we're assessing total financial planning. And if you take this survey, it's going to identify, oh, here's where some of my strengths are, but here's some of my gaps, right? And then you can go through the process of your unique situation. What do you need to do to maybe meet some of these gaps and get yourself ahead of where you're at now, right? So this is a good assessment tool. Oh, and here we're sharing too, because of the volume of questions coming in today, that you can also click to a link in the chat because we recognize that some of these questions are very customized and specific to you. And you can get an introductory call and get your specific situation addressed at a time that's convenient for you. So please go ahead and connect in that way. We've got a lot of questions here. All right, so we'll jump to this. So I would say, the first question I see that's, because we talked a lot about Roth today, what we didn't talk about is what is a backdoor Roth? Miriam, would you like to talk to what that is?
Sure, I'll take that. Yes, we didn't even get to backdoor Roths. So typically, if you want to contribute to a Roth IRA, the IRS has limits on how much you can make and still be able to qualify to contribute to that. So if you're over 129,000 if you're single, or 204 if you're married filing separate, you're not really allowed to contribute to a Roth, but that's when this backdoor Roth comes into play. So this involves making like a non-deductible contribution to a traditional IRA and then converting that into a Roth. So there are some nuances that you should be careful of if you decide to do this. It's best if you do this if you do not currently have any IRA money. So if you make that non-deductible contribution to the IRA in the past and has not been converted, you will have to pay like a pro rata tax on that. So it can be a little tricky. I just strongly urge you to seek a financial advisor or tax professional to help if it's something that you want to do for your situation. But it is a way for people to contribute to Roth, like if they don't have a Roth 401k or if they're not within the income limits to contribute to the Roth IRA. That's a great strategy. So let me take a look at the next question here.
And I
All
would say,
right.
Miriam, I
So,
think you meant to say married filing jointly, right?
oh,
'Cause-
yes. I'm so
yeah.
sorry.
No
Thank you.
worries.
All right. Next question I see here is, should I be paying more on my mortgage to get it paid off before retirement?
Oh, that's
Danielle, you
such a
want to take
good,
it?
yeah, that's such a good question. Sorry, I jumped in because we do hear that a lot because I get it. There's a lot of safety and security in having your home paid off, but it's not a yes or no question. I can't say that at a high level without knowing your interest rate and what are your other sources of savings. So how are you addressing that? So think about if you're one of those individuals who has a locked in interest rate that's in 2 or 3%. I mean, money markets today, you can get 5% on cash. So that's exceeding your 2 or 3%. The math is never going to work on that, right? If you have a higher interest rate, that's something that you may want to consider and you can do the break even. But I'd also think about when I'm in that situation, the emotional part of it, if you're concerned with, am I going to have enough money? Am I more comfortable putting that money into the home and having that money tied up there, right? Or do I want to put it into a brokerage account and build up my taxable account? So if you could end up in a situation with a much larger brokerage account that you could use to pay for not only the mortgage, but you also could pay for the other expenses that you have and need in retirement or even before retirement. So you have a larger pool of money to continue to paying that expense, or you divert money to that mortgage and that pool of flexibility is smaller. So generally, most things you're going to be better off investing the money, but it's going to depend on how you're saving and it's going to depend on your particular interest rates. Okay. All right. So let's see here. Next question. All right, I'll ask you, Miriam, what happens if I retire and I have really bad luck, bad timing, we call it, and the markets fall considerably?
Yep, that's a valid concern because, as you know, people do retire during bad markets. I'd say on average, once every 4 years, the market's down. And we know that the market is going to go down. That's unavoidable. What we want to try to plan for is, can you stomach those falls, right? We do a Monte Carlo simulation that basically runs 1,000 different scenarios on what your portfolio could do. So say you have a 60% stock, 40% bond portfolio. We'll take 1,000 different scenarios on what that portfolio could do, like up 10%, down -5, up 5, down 2, like all the different various scenarios that could happen. And we try to get you in like a probability of success over 80%, in the green zone. So what that is telling us is that you've been able to go through a couple of market falls or crashes and still been able to, not run out of money, if you will. So what we do know is that if you just take your money and hold it in cash, you're not going to be able to outpace inflation. So we do know you need to be invested. And we also kind of take that simulation to figure out what's a good strategy for you. Sometimes you may need to take on a little more risk. Sometimes you may not need to take on that much more risk. And, it can go back to you on if you can handle a fall like that. And, it's just going to depend on how much you have saved up, what your spending is going to be, and if we can stomach those returns. Your asset allocation will matter as you prepare for retirement and then when you're in retirement. The next one is, how do I actually replace my income when I'm retired? Danielle, you take that one.
Okay, thank you. I like how they said actually, because I think we think about who's here today, it's preparing for retirement. And I think if you haven't been down this step, you just haven't experienced it, right? So what I mean by that is if you're working with an advisor, such as a Savant, essentially what we do is we replace your paycheck for you. So you can have that monthly, you can have it quarterly, you can have it annually. We've got all the flexibility in the world in terms of that income stream coming to you. And then let's pretend we have a set amount and then you need more for 1 month to purchase a car, or you're doing a specific charitable gift, or you're giving money to family or some home improvement. You call in and we raise the additional cash needed. And behind the scenes, when we have these different buckets that we talked about, the taxable, the tax deferred, and ultimately the Roth accounts, we can navigate based on your current income situation for the year, where is the best place to draw from? And then also above and beyond that, what's the best place to sell? So I think the easiest example to think of in recent history is 2022, right? You're not retired now if you're talking about, am I ready for retirement? But let's pretend you were retired just a few years ago. In 2022, we had not only the stock market off, but we also had the bond market off. And the bond market was off double digits, 10% or more. And when we think of that, well, where do we go? Well, we also have part of the portfolio that's allocated to alternatives. So we have some of the portfolio, the majority of the portfolio, and honestly, is off, but you have part of the portfolio. We can take the gains from these pieces to allow the other pieces to recover. So you're not selling the stocks, for example, in the down market. So the more flexibility you have, the more time and runway you give yourself now in preparing to set yourself up in such a way, you'll then have control and be able to have a tax and risk efficient income stream that we really take care of for you and partner right alongside you in retirement. And that would be the ideal answer and the ideal solution. So yeah, we're right past the 45 minutes. So thank you so much for joining Miriam and I today.
Thanks, everyone.
If you enjoyed this webinar, visit savantwealth.com/guides and download our complimentary guidebooks, checklists, and other useful financial resources.